Welcome to the Excellence at Work podcast, where we explore the strategies and best practices that drive business success. I'm Rachel Cook, COO of Brandon Hall Group and the host of our podcast, along with members of our executive team. In each episode, we'll dive into the latest trends, insights, and real-world examples from some of the most exciting leaders from organizations worldwide. Be part of our journey and learn from the best as we discuss innovative approaches and cutting-edge technologies for talent management, learning and development, leadership, diversity and inclusion, and more.
Hi, everyone. This is Michael Rochelle, Chief Strategy Officer and Principal Analyst here at the Brandon Hall Group. I'm very excited to join you again in another Excellence at Work podcast. And I have two of my favorite guests on, Sarah and Lisa from BTS. And I'm going to have them both introduce themselves.
Thank you, Michael. I can start. So I'm a partner emeritus at BTS, and I specialize in C-level development and succession.
And hello, good to be here. Lisa Sprenkle. I head up succession planning for BTS and also focus on executive and team performance.
Powerhouses. So I'm sure this is going to be pretty exciting to go through. And let's just kind of kick off what we're covering here today. We're going to be talking about leading for what's next, the future-ready executive, which just is a super catchy term, isn't it? But it's tricky, future-ready. You know, we see with our research that probably 15 or 20% of leaders now think that they're only barely ready for what they have, never mind for what's coming. And then you see AI and all these other things. So I think our theme, if we all agree, is going to be how the future-ready executive framework defines the next era of executive leadership. And I know you'll be sharing that during the podcast and kind of referring to it. I got a chance to review it before the podcast. There's some really important, really insightful things that are in there that I think will bring some impact. I love the behaviors piece, which is a super cool piece of that, because we have to kind of get people into how to go through that norming and how we need to do the how better rather than focusing on the what. So I love that. But Sarah, I'm going to start out with you, and we're going to kind of set the stage. And that's back to that, why the future needs new leaders. So let's talk about why now. What's so critical right now to rethink what it means to be an executive leader?
Yeah. Okay, great. I think the short answer on why now, it starts with our clients, because whenever Lisa and I are engaged in conversations around executive development or succession planning, the number one question that keeps getting asked is, can you help us see the future? So clients look to us to make sense of questions like, what is the future of executive leadership? Which sounds like a really big question, because we work with companies across sectors and geographies, from C-level team to frontline talent. And we like to share the insights we get from that access and that breadth. But this question around the future of leadership has become more urgent because, as we all know, the world of business is changing at a confounding pace, with AI's disruption of business models and org structures, shifts, the political environment, which is impacting global trade and finance. And all of this is creating this interconnected systemic change for companies. So traditional models of leadership, traditional ways of thinking about leadership aren't really sufficient anymore. There's still a lot there that matters, but there needs to be a different conversation. So we went out and scanned the marketplace and the research and to see what is out there. And there's a lot coming out about AI's disruption of business. Very little attention is focused on the implications for equipping leaders for the future as they help their organizations navigate and win in this new world. So we saw an opportunity to provide a research-backed perspective that helps our client partners anticipate, navigate, and shape rather than be reactive to it. So how do we do that? I mean, I can describe our approach, and then Lisa can give you a glimpse into the findings, what we really uncovered there.
I love that, because the underpinning of the data and the trends for the framework, I think, would be helpful. But before you make that transition, there was something that we were talking about in a talk track that we were going through. It's that it's a very powerful statement I want you to comment on. Is leadership transformation is urgent. So first time I've ever heard that. So how do you take something transformational and assign urgency And it has everything to do with changing the behaviors of our leaders. Like that's an action-packed statement.
Yeah. And it gets to a very practical, tangible series of shifts. And that's because it has to happen across the organization at scale in interactions and ways of working. And that's the only thing that's going to enable the speed at which transformation is needing to happen right now. But it starts with understanding what it is before we even approach, how to do it. And we needed to step back and understand that, look, there's already step changes that happen when you get into C-level leadership. So what's different? And the thing that we keep pushing ourselves on is there actually something different about what we're talking in the future? Is it just an amplification of these practices that we know work or are meaningful? So that was the push that we had in this research to distinguish what was core and what was really a transformation, what was going to be needed as a shift in mindsets, capabilities, observable behaviors. So that's what we tried to tackle.
We went through many iterations of this because, as Sarah said, realized, yeah, this is great, but it's not new. It's not different. It's
Mm,
baseline. It's what people have already been doing. And we're being asked of, well, how do we make a shift? What do
yeah,
we need to shift? So it was challenging for us too, because a lot of the things were like, no, we don't want to lose that. Like that's important. And we're
Right.
not losing it, but we're saying it's this and.
Right. So take me through that, Lisa. So let's get into it. Let's just break it down. So we got mindsets going, we got behavioral shifts going, we have all this stuff going, but I just have to put it out there. There's a lot of frameworks out there right now. People are really trying to scrub it, not to compete with one another, but trying to figure out what's the holy grail of leadership at this point with all these things that we're talking about. What makes this framework different than other frameworks?
Well, and that's a great question because we at BTS, we kind of went around with this as well of what can we provide that's different, or we've always had the mindset that we can't build a static model that doesn't work for our clients, that we need to partner with our clients. We bring insights, we bring experience, we bring research. We also meet our client where we are. Authorship as ownership is one of our first values of it's a spirit of partnership. We really kind of debated on whether or not this is something that we thought we should tackle. But after Sarah said getting so many questions from clients on what's next, realizing no one has a crystal ball, we realized we do have a lot of research and we do have a point of view on this. So we want to be clear, it's not a competency model. There's a lot of competency models out there, but it's really evolving. It's an evolving framework. So it's meant to be provocative. It's meant to help start the conversation of what for your organization. And starting conversation is so valuable.
And I would add to what Lisa's saying that we pushed ourselves also to look beyond leadership data, right? Because yeah, we have experts that partner with our client companies at every level of the organization, across industries around the world, on culture, change at scale, leadership mindsets and capabilities, go-to-market strategies, teaming, succession planning, learning, skills mapping. Right? We go the gamut, and all of those touch points and the unique way we work with our clients give us sort of a insight and knowledge around where to start, but also context, because we had to go broader and say, we believe that leadership is relentlessly contextual. So yes, we have this knowledge, but leaders are operating in and going to be operating in a very dynamic environment. So we've go outside in also and look at recent studies on the future that leaders will be navigating. So we looked at McKinsey, Russell Reynolds, MIT Sloan, HBR. And then we actually went out into look at the macro environmental data and trend reporting so that we could bring in context of the world that business leaders will be navigating. And that means we went to the World Economic Forum, Conference Board, and we tried to bring in a true cross-sector context on what are they now going to be leading through into the future. All of that then was synthesized and into what we're calling next practices for executives that we organized into this framework that Lisa's going to do a deeper dive on.
Yeah, I think looking at that external data was really important too. And
Hmm.
internally, ETS, we brought in experts from all different areas like change, culture, executive leadership. So assessment, looking at all those, had IO Psychs taking a look at it as well. So had a lot of robust data, and you can imagine a lot of interesting dialogue about it.
So I know the audience is probably thinking this. Can you share like what are some of the biggest or top of mind shifts, some of the froms to the twos that you could share with us?
Yeah, so we actually landed on 5 main shifts around planning, around growth, around frontline ownership, around volatility, and around managing people. And so I can go a little bit deeper, Sarah and I can go a little bit deeper on what those look like. Really, the first shift we looked at is the traditional strategic planning, which is happening right now across all organizations, or disruption based planning. And what does that look like? So instead of responding to crises, think about the S curves of when do you need to jump on the next change and how innovation is really accelerating those S curves. So we really wanted to highlight here that it's okay. Well, strategic planning is obviously important, but you also need to think about what could disrupt that and what are the things that
Hmm.
are coming at you. But the other thing we had a lot of conversations about is when you do that, what does that mean for communication and alignment across the organization? So being really clear about, where are we going? What are we doing? But also the why and the how. And if you need to pivot, being clear on why you need to pivot. So that communication part, when you talk to Michael about behaviors, that whole alignment and communication becomes so important when you're talking about strategic planning moving to more disruption based planning, because there's a lot more alignment that needs to happen.
And to add to that, whereas many companies historically do annual planning to set up their budgets for the coming year, what we're seeing in this shift is that not only do you have to use sort of that future back thinking to constantly use disruption based thinking, what could disrupt this, is to do it in a more iterative and integrated way with the business. So instead of making it sort of a seasonal activity, it
Hmm.
needs to in shorter cycles with more frequency.
We've got a framework. We've done a lot of research, a lot of insights. We've put it forward. So this is where the hardest part is for organizations, right? It's applying something that they've been given. So they have this groundbreaking framework. How are organizations applying this framework?
The first shift was more that moving more, as Sarah was just saying too, it's not just annual. The second shift we really saw is, and this is the hardest for CEOs, is balancing consistent growth with what we talk about being rapid experimentation. So instead of managing stability, how are they continuing to grow? And right now people are rewarded for that upward shift,
Hmm.
but you set expectations with shareholders and board. What might that look like? Are there going to be seasons of low growth and then seasons of intense growth? And that's going to become, we see from all the data we see, that's going to become more the norm. And it's going to be really interesting to hear how that's communicated and how Wall
Hmm.
Street reacts to this. The third one is moving from, and this one is really, we feel like not new, but now more imperative, is shifting from that hierarchy to that frontline leadership and frontline ownership. So, really trying to empower teams more through clarity, through context. And again, we don't think this is new. Organizations have been doing this for years. There's a major airline that talks about making it right. Nordstrom is always noted for like
Hmm.
frontline, but if you think about all the information that's coming to leaders now and the volume of information, it's impossible not to shift ownership. So I think
Hmm.
at this, it's going to be, back to our first point, communicating where are we going? Why are we going there? What are the priorities? So really not just talking the talk, but walking the walk of frontline ownership. The fourth one we see is really reframing from trying to reduce risk to seeing what are the opportunities and volatility. So the future back thinking, the risk storming, the always looking for emerging signals, making bold bets. So always looking for those new opportunities and thinking of risk as opportunity. So that's definitely a mindset shift, but also a behavior shift. And what are you rewarding? And then the fifth one we see is managing from people leadership to managing people and AI. And
Hmm.
so build, how do you train, how do you leverage and optimize AI, managing performance through that. And recently in the news, we've seen several organizations combine their chief people officer with their chief innovation officer or chief technology officer. And that's certainly a change where they're moving it to under the CPO because they realize you're managing people and AI. And, can you imagine that just a few years ago, that would not have happened. So that's a shift we're seeing as well.
Sarah, any thoughts?
No, I think all of this represents sort of letting go. I was
Mm-hmm.
listening to CEO podcast a couple of days ago with a client, and he talked a lot about how you, as a CEO, set up a culture that gives permission to folks from frontline leadership up
Mm-hmm.
to let to make sure that they're not continuing to play the same playbook and same story in their head about what good or what great can look like, and
Mm-hmm.
give them and to take risk in a different way. And that goes to that, particularly for financial services companies who are really subject to all kinds of audit, et cetera. It's very hard to shift a culture of, risk mitigation to risk opportunity.
Right.
That really takes a significant amount of
Mm-hmm.
confidence at the C level to be able to communicate that through the organization in a responsible way so that people understand how to take risk differently and use data to inform those risks in a different way. So it does get a little granular in the types
Mm-hmm.
of fears that we see, but the framework that we've developed actually links to observable behaviors for each of these shifts. So for the clients that we're working with, it really gives them a leg up on how they begin to think about, assess for, and select leaders moving up into significant key roles in the organization.
It's it's an interesting concept, and it's one that sounds really groundbreaking. The challenge always is, and I'm sure audience members are thinking about this as well, as like, how do you apply it? Like, how do you get this thing to work? What are the steps? Can you share examples of organizations you're working with where they're applying this future ready executive framework?
Yeah, I could share a few examples. So, we're seeing the framework being used for leadership development, succession planning, CEO transition, executive coaching. And for example, with leadership development, we're building this into, and clients are using how they run business simulations, how they run assessment centers. So, what are some of these new mindsets? And as Sarah talked about, I think the first step of this is some self awareness as well, that are we letting go and
Mm-hmm.
realizing where we need to let go and where we still need to guide the process or to have some guardrails. And that's hard. We all have the best intentions, but sometimes we're diminishing others and not realizing it. So building it into discussions and self-awareness, we're building it into high potential. But there's a lot of, I think about COVID. In COVID, we saw a lot of what we call hidden gems that really stood out, and others that might have been high potentials that kind of flailed during COVID and when they were expected to do new things and manage through ambiguity. So this is a way to see, all right, these are a bit different shifts. And might there
Mm-hmm.
be in the organization that have these mindsets that can really be some of the leaders at other levels, not just at the executive level. That's one way that we're applying it. Succession planning is one of the key ways as well. So recently, Sarah and I had a whiteboarding session with a client, and we are using this model to really help shape how the chief people officer and the CEO could align on what this looks like in the future. So they needed to look 3 to 5 years out. And this really pushes you out from the person who's currently in the role to what the organization needs in the future, and also gave some confidence to them as well to present this to their board and to bring this to their board as well. And one of my favorite ways that we're using this is in executive coaching. So the framework is really used to expand that client conversation, to provoke some new thinking, and to really challenge the executive of, all right, what are you doing in these areas? Or what are some behaviors that we can start to integrate and that you can start to lead with that will help set you up better for the future?
So we've got this moving within our organization, but they're going to need help. So how does BTS assist in this transformation?
I think it's through exactly what Lisa's describing. It's the sitting down with the client and asking, we're always in collaboration with the client. So we're really asking them, what problem are you trying to solve? Start with that and understand specifically, are you trying to get an entire cohort of folks shifted into a mindset of experimentation? Are you trying to are you culture? Is there a culture need that's happening here? Are you in a succession mindset? Are you trying to understand how to give the board confidence that you as a management team are placing the right bets on the investment into talent, or do you need to acquire different talent? All of those applications are dependent on what are they trying to solve for.
Hmm.
As Lisa described, say they're trying to understand what, kind of to respond to that question that we started with, what can you help us see the future? What are our leaders going to need to do differently? If they're trying to get down to the tactical way of looking at job specifications, what roles will be required? How will those roles be changing? And what is the profile of leadership at that level in that type of a role? This framework then can be introduced to augment what they already understand within their own company and ask the questions, are you also thinking about these types of qualities of leadership that are going to become important in the future? And let them know that we can assess for them by integrating the way we ask questions when, say, an interview process, on an assessment, a survey-based assessment, a 360, in a leader lab where we're doing observational assessment. And we're linking these shifts that we described into those observable behaviors so we can then provide data back to the client so that they can begin to look at their future talent a little bit differently, which helps them also to pinpoint what to develop in those leaders.
I would also add to that, as this is a framework, we're not saying you have to add all 5 of these. These are all, I mean, these 5 things are important, but it might not be important for your organization now. So, for example, we have a client, there's like 2 out of 5 of these are like, this is what we need to focus on in the next couple
Hmm.
of years. So the other ones are nice to have, but we're always about starting small, starting where you have the energy. So there's a couple things that they need to focus on. One is this balancing risk and innovation. And so really focusing on what that looks like for their organization because of where they are in the organization's life cycle, and then the frontline ownership. So those are the 2 that they really focusing on, and that we're really helping them build out what are the behaviors for your organization? How do you actually accomplish this?
Yeah, I love that because with frameworks, even with the frameworks that we work with as well, so everyone is like, that's not us. We're unique. We're different. You can take 2 companies from even the same industry, same part of the world. That whole contextualizing and giving people, okay, we understand. So maybe you start here. There's the how and the where answer, and you try this, and they're always very anxious about the time, resource constraints, budget constraints, all these constraints. They're like, okay, what's the 80-20 rule around this? Like, what should we do first? Get maximized benefit, get buy-in, things like that. It's great that your team helps organizations to do that and make it successful. And then the one that nobody likes to talk about is leadership runs across a lot of challenges when it comes to change readiness. It's a very specific way people think about leadership in organizations. And it sounds like you're helping organizations to achieve change, to be able to go through that transformational piece and not have resistance slow it down or stop it. So that's pretty cool. So just kind of keep going, Sarah. So what do you say to leaders when they feel overwhelmed by all this change? We get the same thing, like all of a sudden they hit tilt. So what do you say to them?
It's exhausting for them right now. It really is because it's that, was it Donald Rumsfeld that said the unknown unknowns? There are so many unknown unknowns happening right now that they're trying to model for a future that's hard to see and do it with significant current day pressure of meeting quarterly targets, right? And their boards of directors are often also confounded by this. They
Hmm.
really are trying to be helpful, and they know that they have to serve the shareholder by ensuring that the company is keeping pace. But it's raising more questions in the boardroom with the CEOs than it is coming up with answers right now. So the companies I find, or the clients that I find that don't feel overwhelmed are the ones that have shifted into a learning mindset.
Hmm.
They're willing to use curiosity to start asking different questions while keeping performance happy at the same time. The business has to run,
Mm-hmm.
the stock form, right? The client has to be served. So there's a significant focus that has to be paid on ensuring that their performance is sound. Right now,
Mm-hmm.
that rapid experimentation mindset that can happen in parallel so that they set up for the future. And I think the clients that I've worked with who are not feeling overwhelmed are grounded in those two things. They
Mm-hmm.
don't, they're looking at it like, we have to reinvent the entire company overnight. That's overwhelming. But taking kind of incremental 3 horizon steps to shifts are working for most clients. And a lot of people also ask us, well, with the introduction of agentic talent, AI-based talent,
Mm-hmm.
what executives need, how are you going to handle that? Or what's that quality that we'll need in that executive leadership role? What's changing there? And I think the context to that answer, I do have an answer, but I think the context of that answer is that when I talk to board members, particularly about what they need from their CEOs and C-level leadership, you always get common themes still today around making bold moves, using data-driven decisions, acquiring and leveraging key talent effectively. And as we talked about a little bit before, we know that already there's a step change that happens when you move into the C-suite. It's foundational capabilities that aren't going to go away, which are things like seeing problems from the enterprise mindset, understanding how to inspire and motivate employees across an organization, building and leveraging a strong executive team, influencing a wide array of stakeholders, getting complex strategy right. All that is critical and will remain important in the future. What will be different in the future, if we were to think about sort of what the context will be, is that problems will be solved differently because everyone from the front line to the board will have access to superhuman intelligence through AI. So how executive leaders approach planning, strategy, place market bets, hire key talent, evaluate risk is all going to get impacted by the ability to source broad sets of information faster and solve cross-functional problems across their organizations using AI agents instead of human talent. So cycle times are going to be reduced, et cetera. But this amount of change, I think, can feel overwhelming, but exciting. It also sets up a paradox because while AI extends our access to PhD level intelligence, the qualities like discernment, ability to weigh context, values, consequence, in other words, to use judgment becomes an essential quality of leadership. So leaders of the future are going to need to call on sort of interdisciplinary thinking rather than deep expertise. And I think that has implications for talent folks and how they look at the development of executive leaders for the future.
Okay, so now I'm going to put you on the spot. So pick one. What's the one most important human element that you just brought up that people need to know about for leadership in the new era?
Judgment.
Judgment.
And I would add curiosity if we could add a second one.
Sure, why not?
And humility if we could add a third one.
Well, since you brought up the three, is there an order or are they all equally important?
From my perspective, I think judgment requires humility, curiosity, courage, empathy, the ability to listen to voices beyond a narrow set of maybe direct reports so that you better understand problems and opportunities with a learning mindset, but with the confidence to move quickly. I think those sort of are the underpinnings of using good judgment. So I'll go back to judgment as the first one.
Lisa, what do you think?
So I think Sarah's really incorporated everything under judgment there. It's just like that's different from AI. AI can't be your judgment. So when we're combining it with AI, that's a judgment. And the reason I bring up humility and curiosity is because we find like the higher you go in the organization, the less humility and curiosity you naturally have. So this is really forcing leaders to go back to that of, I still have to be open. I don't know everything, and that's okay. I can't know everything.
Well, you're bringing back that human emotional part that you can't, that it's part of us. we call it biological intelligence. We have emotional intelligence. That's what makes us different and actually makes us imperfect versus a perfect computational environment like artificial intelligence. We need that HI and AI together. Just to riff on this a little bit, if you're a leader that's in this mixed environment with now having to deal with AI and people at the same time, does judgment become a two-part piece? Because you have judgment is based on what you're seeing circumstances, but also I know this sounds crazy, but like I think about the stuff in the middle of the night is who am I delegating to? Am I delegating to an agent, a digital twin? Am I giving it to the person? Am I asking them to work together? How do I tell a person that AI is better at this because it's just, it can multiply six-figure numbers by six-figure numbers. And that seems to be another part of the judgment too. Before all of this, judgment was based on how you deal with people, but now you're dealing with having to make difficult choices between working in those two environments. So it'll be interesting to see how it all plays out.
Yeah.
But any thoughts
And
on that?
well, I think it's a great point. And it's also, how does that translate into performance management? The
Right.
KPIs around how someone's performance is evaluated. Are they effectively using both human talent as well as AI agents to accomplish the work? And listen, I think that those considerations will have to be incorporated into performance management in the future in order to increase the speed of adoption, because it's hard. It's generational, but it's hard. I mean, the workforce that's coming, graduating and coming into the workforce is going to be much more adept, as always, in working with AI as a partner. There are those of us not coming out of college. Um, you know, this
A
is
little
all
bit.
new. That's incumbent then on senior executives, right? Because generationally, they have to break from the story they have in their head and what got them here and what they've known for the 30 years, 20 years that they've been working up the chain and getting into executive leadership. And that does provoke that letting go and that mindset shift where they have to get now into a learning mindset so that they can understand deeply where AI is going to be an enabler and where humans are going to need to be involved. Right now, we know from the research that the adoption is still middling. It's kind of, there's not full adoption on AI, and a lot of companies will say they're not realizing the true benefit yet of AI. Doesn't mean it's going to go away, So we're at the early stages of understanding how to use it.
But I
And that
like,
is our shift that we mentioned, moving from people management, people
right.
leadership to people AI. So we see it also as, or you're managing someone on your team that is using AI, but helping them identify what do we need out of this information. Like I could just put in there, hey, summarize this data. And, we get a nice summary, but not that great versus someone who really knows how to use AI. And I'm just blown away by some of the prompts that we share a lot of prompts internally at BTS on Slack
Mm-hmm.
of identify these top 3 things and then look at it from this perspective and then look at it as, if you're thinking of it as an expert in this area and just like what all that you can add to it and what a difference it is and the outcomes. We're managing, those of us that did not just graduate from college, we're managing people that can do this and can do this better than we can. But again, providing the context, like why are we doing this? What are we trying to do? How does it link to the organization? Now help us get the best out of AI. So how do we manage people to do that? So it's managing both. So 3 a.m. it's thinking of, all right, I give it to a person who's managing AI. So you might be doing both.
It's interesting listening to what you were saying, Lisa. It does bring back the curiosity that you brought up. It's a whole new form of curiosity, right? It used to be that we had to source the information. It was an intellectual curiosity. Now you've got a different type of curiosity, which is, hey, what prompt did you build? Like, what more could I ask? That triggers something. But I think I liked one of the things that you brought up too around the idea of courage, because the elephant in the room is, a lot of what's going on with leadership right now is going to be like what's going to happen overall to people in the workplace as AI does what it has to do. And I think we're going to have courageous leaders that, to your point, they're going to be put in tough situations with the AI, and we're already seeing it. And I think that human element, that emotional element of being able to make potentially tough decisions as AI transforms the workplace. So it's going to be, I think the framework is kind of proven out that this is the thing that we need to make sure we get it right with leaders. So I know we're coming up on time. I just kind of want to wrap on a couple points if I could throw out to actually both of you. And I know it's such a cliche question to ask, but in this situation, it's so important is if the people listening to this podcast could take one action, what should it be? Because this really is super important. You shared so much information. There's so much that we could be doing, but what is that very first thing that should be done?
Say to surface the conversation. Start thinking about and asking others, what does being future ready look like for our organization? So if you're not talking about it, start talking about it.
I love that.
Don't wait.
Sarah?
Don't wait. I mean, it's
Don't
going to
wait.
happen.
I like that. Don't wait.
If you can wait for it to be done to you, or you can have a hand in creating it. So don't wait.
I love that. Don't wait. How about you, Sarah?
I guess I would respond also for executive leaders who are listening to this, ask the same question, is to step back themselves and to start first with what's their relationship to this? How do they actually feel about it and understand it? And what will they need to do as individual leaders to embrace this and to become more curious and to be better able to sit in the seat that they're in with humility and to recognize that this is the future. That would be
That's
my
great.
response.
So we're back to humility. So we've gotten the judgment, the curiosity, the humility, the courage all worked in. I agree with you. I think leadership, I'm glad you said it. It's going to be a humbling experience moving
It will
forward
be.
as a leader. It sure is, and no one's got an advantage anymore. It's a level playing field of what's coming next because nobody knows how this is all going to play out. It's been
That's right.
exciting. I want to make sure people can continue the conversation with you. So how's the best way for them to learn more about you, or how can they connect with you or engage with you? You're both around LinkedIn. I know we're going to be being able to provide some contact information to get people the framework, everything that's necessary to kind of bring context to all of this. Any closing thoughts?
I guess I would just say, reach out to us. Don't be intimidated. We're going to meet you where you are. Every company is working at a very different place right now around and grappling with this same question, and no one's got the right answer right now. So just consider partners in that process. And as Lisa said, just start.
Yeah, I like
And
that.
as you can tell, we love to talk about this, to share insights, and to hear, most importantly, hear where organizations are right now too. So definitely a two-way conversation.
So I'm going to summarize with just start and don't wait. That's what I took away from this. It's great to talk about all of this stuff, but we got to get going. We got to get going. We got to get transformation starts with that very first step, right? Okay. Lisa, Sarah, it's always a pleasure. Thank you very much for joining me today. Thank our audience for joining as well. This is Michael Rochelle, Chief Strategy Officer, Principal Analyst at the Brandon Hall Group. And until next time, have a great day.